When I was 5 years old, my mom and I died in a car accident. The people behind the accident were my dad and my mom's best friend. After cashing in on 2 insurance policies, they got married and lived happily ever after. Sometimes, that woman would be scared. Will the mother and daughter who died come back as vengeful ghosts? My dad laughed and called her superstitious. But they didn't know, I didn't die. And when I came back for revenge, I'd be scarier than any ghost. One rainy night when I was 5, I ate a little cake that Fiona, my mom's best friend, gave me. Soon, I started vomiting and had a high fever. Mom was very worried. The driver wasn't home that day, so she drove me to the hospital herself despite the heavy rain. In the most remote part of the road, a big truck crashed into our car and flipped it over. 2 people got out of the truck, a man and a woman. The man was my dad, the woman was Fiona. Fiona was my mom's best friend from college. After she divorced her husband, she said she had nowhere to go with her son. My mom graciously took them in. Back then, Fiona cried with gratitude, holding my mom's hand and saying, "Wendy, you're the best person in the world to me." But at that moment, Fiona leaned into our car, checked for a moment, and said in the coldest tone, "Wendy is dead." My dad stood by, weak and pale, muttering to himself, "It's good that she's dead. Only then can we be together." Just as Fiona was about to agree with my dad, she suddenly noticed something and exclaimed, "Hey, that little brat isn't in the car." My dad was shocked and he and Fiona looked through the car window, realizing I wasn't inside. A few steps away in the bushes, I was holding my mouth tightly to keep from making any noise. Mom, with her last breath, had pushed me out of the shattered car window, telling me, "Jenny, run." Now, I heard my dad's voice through the pouring rain, "Jenny is just a kid, maybe we should let her go." Fiona firmly replied, "No way, we have to get rid of her. She's 5, she understands. You want her to tell on us? Chase her, she's sick and can't run far." The flashlight's white beam shone from behind, and I crawled forward desperately. The cold rain pelted my burning hot body like stones, branches in the bushes scratched my skin, but I had one thought. I wanted to live. Only by living could I avenge my mom. I crawled until I saw a raging river. From behind, I heard Fiona shriek, "Found her. There are tracks where she crawled. Let's go after her." There was no other choice. I jumped into the river. The case was soon closed. A truck driver, fatigued, crashed into Wendy in her daughter's car. Wendy died on the spot, and her daughter Jenny ran away in fright but accidentally fell into the river. With the heavy rain that night, the river swelled, so Jenny's body was never found, presumed to have been washed out. To see the surveillance on that road had been out for a long time, and the person to take the blame was a terminally ill truck driver. Following the procedures, 4 years later, I was officially declared dead. Before it happened, my mom and I had large life insurance policies, with my dad as the beneficiary. The huge compensation fell into my dad's hands. His previous business was struggling, but with this money, he revitalized his cash flow and became the richest man in the city. Fiona married him and flaunted her wealth online every day, showing off bags, watches, and jewelry, envied by many as a rich wife. They had another child, and including Fiona's son from her first marriage, they seemed like a perfect happy family. Fiona believed in Buddhism. She donated a lot to temples and collected many blessed prayer beads. My dad often did charity work too and was frequently seen on TV as a successful entrepreneur. "Look, Mom. You once taught me that bad people get their comeuppance and the heavens will punish them, so Jenny should be a good person." But as I grew up, I realized it was as untrue as Santa Claus. I had to take revenge myself. So, 12 years after the car accident, just when everyone had almost forgotten it, I came back. "Hello, everyone, my name is Jenny," I introduced myself on my first day at the new school. The window reflected my image in school uniform, with long smooth hair tied up in a ponytail. My face was fair and delicate, with a small scar at the end of my eyebrow. That scar was from the car accident 12 years ago. My classmates looked at me curiously, whispering among themselves, "She's so pretty. I heard she came from an orphanage and wins a scholarship every year. Oh my gosh, she's like the tragic heroine from a teen drama. Don't we have a male lead for that drama too? Perfect match, right, Philip? The guy being asked sat in the last row, wearing limited edition sneakers, chewing gum, tall, handsome, and rich, just like the bad boy hero in a teen drama. He raised his head at those words, glanced at my chest, and said casually, "This one's not even an A cup, not my type." His voice was loud enough for the whole class to hear. All eyes were on me, waiting for my reaction, blushing, embarrassment, crying, or feeling helpless. But I calmly walked through the rows, went to his side, and looked at his name on the book. "Hi, Philip, nice to be your new desk mate. By the way, I have A's in all my subjects. If you need any help with your homework, just ask." There was a moment of silence before the classroom erupted in noise. Philip looked up at me, surprised. I met his gaze calmly and gave him a smile. He didn't recognize me, but I had never forgotten him. 12 years ago, he and his mom came to my house for the first time. He was crying for an orange. Mom gave him one. He took a bite and spat the juice all over her chest. The juice soaked through her thin summer clothes. Philip stared at the wet spot and laughed. "So, Philip, I'm truly happy. Happy that you're still as much of a jerk as you were 12 years ago." A week into the school year, everyone knew I had a crush on Philip. Many classmates quietly pulled me aside, warning me about all his bad deeds. Philip, known as a playboy among the students, dated a different girl every month and then dumped them. Girls cried, caused scenes, and even cut their wrists for him, but he never looked back. But I ignored all the warnings and chased after Philip wholeheartedly. When he came back from basketball, his favorite sea salt citrus sports drink was already waiting on his desk. When he didn't do his homework and got scolded by the teacher, I'd silently do it for him after finishing my own. At that time, Philip was hot and heavy with the school beauty from the neighboring vocational school. He got bored after 3 weeks and dumped her, indifferent to her tears. One day after school, he got cornered in an alley. By the time I arrived, the leader of the gang was raising an iron rod to hit Philip. "Think money's everything? I'll beat you to death, you loser." Seeing the rod about to hit Philip, I lunged over, shielding him with my body. The rod struck my back, and I collapsed into Philip's arms. "Jenny." I heard Philip's voice close to my ear. It was the first time I'd heard him sound so scared. The gang leader, fearing he'd kill someone, called his buddies to flee. Philip tried to chase them but ultimately returned to help me up. "Are you okay?" My hair was a mess, and I could barely stand from the pain. Yet, I still managed to ask, "Are you all right?" When he nodded, I gave a faint smile, "As long as you're okay." After saying that, I passed out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Philip was sitting by my bedside. When he saw I was awake, he scratched his head in frustration. "It was that bitch Maggie who sent them. I'll get her for this." I shook my head, softly saying, "It might not be her. You've dumped so many girls, plenty of them might want revenge." Philip paused, realizing I had a point. Then, suddenly interested, he looked at me. "I've gone through so many girlfriends. Doesn't that bother you?" I lowered my gaze. "Of course, it does. Then why are you still into me?" I nodded slightly and answered softly, "How could I not be, my dearest Philip? Your sneakers, your designer watch, your lavish spending on girls, all came from the blood money of my mom's insurance. 12 years, and your family's photos have sat on my bedside table. I've slashed them with a knife countless times." Philip chuckled, ruffling my hair. "You're so pretty and still willing to be just a backup. That's something." He rummaged through his bag and tossed me an invitation. "All right, I'm single now. Let's give it a try. Me birthday parties next weekend. Come over and dress nice." Written on the invitation was his home address. That mansion was bought with the compensation money from my mom's death, guarded 24/7 by security. No unwelcome guests could get in. But with this invite, I could walk right in. "I'll definitely be there." I clutched the invitation tightly, my voice shaking with excitement. Philip smirked. Look at how cheap you are. I didn't care about his words at all. Leaving the hospital alone, I went into a deserted alley. Waiting for me in the shadows was the thug who'd attacked Philip. I handed him a wad of cash. Good job. I'll call you if I need this again. After he left, I took out the invitation, rubbing it over and over. A tremendous joy filled my chest. Dad, Auntie. It's been 12 long years. We're finally going to meet again. Early on the weekend, I arrived at Philip's house. Classmates hadn't arrived yet. Only the maids were arranging flowers and balloons in the living room for the party. I dressed meticulously today. My off-shoulder black dress highlighted my fair skin. My hair was pinned up high, adorned with pearls that shimmered under the lights. Philip's eyes lit up when he saw me. Looking beautiful today. I subtly avoided his outstretched hand and nodded slightly. Hello, Uncle. Philip paused and turned around. Behind him stood a pot-bellied man in an expensive robe, frowning at me. The maid greeted respectfully, Hello, Leo. And I greeted him silently in my heart. Long time no see, Dad. Leo pushed the maid aside and strode towards me. He looked down at me, then turned to Philip. Who's she? For a moment, my heart trembled quietly. Philip replied, She's my classmate. My father sneered, Classmate? He turned to glare at me. Don't think I don't know who you are. I lowered my head, acting flustered. The next second, I heard my father say sternly, You're Philip's girlfriend, right? Quietly, I breathed a sigh of relief. Everything was going according to my plan. 12 years had turned a child into a teenager. My appearance had drastically changed. My father didn't recognize me. Softly, with just the right amount of fear, I answered, No, Uncle. He scoffed, looking at Philip. You've had early romances more than once, I won't bother with you. You're on your own. He pointed at me without hesitation. But don't bring any more girlfriends here, or don't blame me for being harsh. After finishing, he turned and left. Philip came to my side, glaring angrily at his retreating figure. Old jerk, he muttered. I didn't say anything, calculating silently. Things were progressing as I hoped. I could enter the mansion through Philip, but to stay here required another plan. One I had long prepared. Helping the maids decorate the living room for a while, classmates started arriving. Taking the chance while Philip greeted them, I slipped away, my gaze towards the innermost room on the second floor. That was my dad's room, and now, loud scolding came from there. I pay you so much, and you raise my son like that? When I got to the door, a stack of test papers was being thrown out. Each paper had terrifyingly low scores, only 20 or 30 points. Inside the study, my dad was scolding a girl who looked like a college student. You call yourself a student from a prestigious university, yet you can't even tutor a little kid properly. People like you are trash in society. My dad was yelling passionately, and the girl opposite him had already started to cry silently. Next to her, a small boy was coldly drawing lines on the table with a ruler. He was Fiona's son, Mark. Seeing my dad about to come out, I quickly hid in the dark corner of the hallway. After he left, the girl also emerged from the room, her face covered in tears, crying as she walked away. I stepped forward in time and handed her a tissue. Are you okay? The girl was at her most vulnerable. When she encountered a bit of kindness, she couldn't help but open up, crying and complaining, That kid is a total devil. I tried to teach him, and he immediately flipped my skirt. When I tried to stop him, he kicked my knee. Look at this bruise. She grabbed my hand. You came here because of the tutoring job too, right? Don't get involved. This job isn't worth it. I comforted her for a bit, and after she left, I quietly opened the study door. Inside, Mark was sitting arrogantly on the desk. He had a small cat in his arms and was trying to light its tail with a lighter. The cat was screaming sharply in his lap. Seeing me enter, he gave a mischievous smile, his eyes wandering over my face, chest, and legs. Another new tutor? Not bad, you're prettier than the last one. That smile was like the skin of a toad, just looking at it made one uncomfortable. But I merely smiled. Mark, you shouldn't scare away your tutors. He was taken aback. You know my name? Caught off guard, the cat took the opportunity to escape from his arms and ran away. I sat down next to him and slowly took his practice book. I not only know your name, but I also know you're quite a genius. Mark was stunned for a moment, then a gleam of excitement appeared in his eyes. Really? But the teachers at school say I'm different from normal people. Of course, he was different from normal people. I had looked into Mark. He was a patient with XYY syndrome. The extra Y chromosome meant he was destined to have aggressive behavior, a tendency towards violence, and antisocial personality traits. Fiona knew this from the prenatal tests, but she still chose to keep the fetus. The reason was simple: she had just moved into our house, planning to kill my mom and take her place. She needed this child to win over my dad's heart, making him her accomplice. So she hid the report about the syndrome and forged a normal one to show my dad. Now that Mark was growing up, his violent nature had become apparent. He had a terrible reputation at school. He once threw a younger boy out of a second-floor window, causing multiple fractures. But he was my dad's only son. No matter how bad he was, my dad couldn't help but spoil him. He even comforted himself, saying, "Little boys are just naughty. They'll grow out of it." At this moment, I calmly patted Mark on the head. Don't mind what others think. They don't understand you. Your dad loves you, but he doesn't understand you either. He hires one tutor after another to make you study, but a genius like you doesn't need to learn those boring things. Mark frowned. But my dad said if I don't do well in the next test, he'll cancel our trip to New Zealand. I lowered my voice and said gently, doing well in tests doesn't require studying. Exams can be cheated on, and teachers can be bribed. Mark looked at me with almost frenzied eyes. After a moment, he smiled. I really like you. He reached out and touched my leg. I suppressed my overwhelming disgust and smiled warmly at him. Half an hour later, Leo came back to the study. What he saw was something he had never seen before. Mark was sitting quietly at the desk, and I was dictating English words to him. When Leo came in, I smiled and handed him the test paper. Mark is really smart. I only taught him once, and he did so well. My dad looked down at the paper and saw a nearly perfect score. He couldn't believe his son had achieved this, but the handwriting was definitely Mark's. Of course, it was Mark's handwriting. Unlike the previous tutors who tried to teach Mark, I simply gave him the answers to copy. Mark pointed at me obediently. They didn't teach me well. I couldn't understand. But Jenny? One lesson and I get it. Dad, I want Jenny to tutor me from now on. You don't need to find anyone else. My dad was overjoyed by Mark's change and naturally agreed to everything. You and Philip, I won't hold it against you. Teach my son well, and you'll be rewarded, he said to me after my dad left. Mark asked suspiciously, you and my brother, what's going on? I looked down at Mark and smiled calmly. Nothing much. I'm just his classmate. Mark sighed in relief. That's good. I can't stand him, always competing for my mom's attention. You don't have to pay him any mind, I said softly, you are Leo's son. The future belongs to you. Mark's eyes lit up with excitement and a strange glint. And you, do you belong to me too? I smiled gently. Of course. When I got to the living room, Philip's birthday party was almost over. Where were you? He asked, displeased. I smiled. Touching up my makeup. I had indeed put on even more beautiful makeup. Under the spotlight, my skin looked like it was dusted with gold. Philip was mesmerized and couldn't help but put his arm around my shoulder. His hand roamed affectionately over my skin. I tried to push him away, but he held me tighter, laughing and whispering in my ear, what's wrong? I'm your boyfriend, can't I touch you? I looked down and forced an awkward smile. Philip thought I was just shy and didn't take it seriously, laughing even louder as he teased me. What he didn't know was that, several meters away, a pair of terrifying eyes were locked onto us. It was Mark. Before anyone could react, Mark suddenly moved. He charged forward out of nowhere and collided with Philip. A 12-year-old boy sprinting at full speed is astonishing. The tall and burly Philip was knocked over, crashing onto the coffee table and then to the ground. Philip cursed, but before he could get up, Mark jumped on him amidst shouts of surprise. He raised something high and stabbed it straight into Philip's hand, yelling, "How dare you touch my stuff? I'll stab you to death." It was a pen, and it punctured right into the back of Philip's hand. Ink and blood splattered everywhere. Philip cried out in pain, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He responded with a sharp elbow to Mark's face, shouting, "Are you crazy?" Mark was just a 12-year-old kid, but Philip was built like a grown man. The blow was brutal. Mark was thrown backward, hitting the ground and convulsing. Moments later, he spat out a mouthful of bloody foam with a tooth in it. Philip, still enraged, ignored the pain in his hand and kicked Mark in the stomach. "Are you looking to die?" Screams filled the air as classmates scattered. A nanny shouted, "Where's Leo? Someone get Leo here." My dad rushed over at the commotion to find Philip pinning Mark down and landing a punch on his face. My dad immediately panicked. He barged in and kicked Philip hard, pulling Mark into his arms. Son, wake up." Mark's nose and mouth were bleeding, and he was barely conscious. My dad was furious. "Call an ambulance." "Philip, you stay right here." Philip was held down by my dad's bodyguards, raising his bleeding hand. Mark stabbed me first with a pen. My dad cursed furiously. "He's only 12. He doesn't know better, and you beat him like this?" Mark came to and weakly sobbed in my dad's arms. "Dad loves me more than Philip, so Philip takes his anger out on me." My dad's eyes were red with rage. He scooped up Mark and shot Philip a furious look before rushing toward the waiting ambulance. The bodyguards and nannies hurriedly followed. Philip was left standing there alone. He grabbed the fruit bowl from the table and threw it at the classmates standing around. "What are you looking at? Get out of here." The classmates fled in fear, and Philip stood there, panting heavily. After a moment, he looked up and saw me. "Why are you still standing here? Leave." Of course, I was the one who stayed. I walked up to him slowly and patted him on the back reassuringly. "Leo is too unfair to you. Even if Mark is his real son, he shouldn't be so biased." Philip always had the image of a rich, privileged young master. People treated him with extra respect because he was Leo's stepson. But inside this house, the difference between a stepson and a biological son was clear. Touched by my words, Philip's hand trembled with anger. He snarled, "A violent fool, and he treats him like a treasure." I sighed softly. "That's just how it is. This empire belongs to Leo. There's always going to be a difference in how he treats his own child versus you." Philip clenched his teeth with hatred. "You don't understand anything. If it weren't for my mom helping him, he would have gone bankrupt a long time ago. This empire should have been mine." I quickly echoed, "Exactly. Even though I'm an outsider, I've read the news. They all say Leo only got back on his feet because of his capable wife. But there are so many stories like the farmer and the snake. People repay kindness with ingratitude and betrayal." I spoke softly, watching as Philip's gaze grew sharper and colder. "Mom, I still remember when I was very young, you bought me some crickets. They were kept in separate cages, but I mischievously put them together in a shoebox. By the next day, they were all dead. I cried a lot, and you taught me to keep them separated, otherwise, they'd fight each other to death. Now, I'm no longer the little girl who cried over dead crickets. I'm pushing my crickets together and stirring them up to fight. It feels surprisingly satisfying to watch them fight. Who do you think will die first?" While Mark was in the hospital, I stayed with Philip at the villa. Being the only one by his side during this tough time, Philip came to trust me even more. He even said, "Jenny, when I inherit the family fortune, I'll make you my wife." I showed a look of surprise and genuine emotion, it doesn't matter whether you inherit the fortune or not, all I care about is that your heart belongs to me. Every night, Philip wanted me to stay with him. But I told him I had to go home, my mom's waiting for me. He was puzzled. Mom? I thought you were an orphan. It's my adoptive mother, I explained. Philip didn't believe me initially. Come on, you're lying. I've never heard you mention an adoptive mother. But soon, a white car pulled up outside the villa. A woman in a silk dress, beautiful and elegant, got out. Is this Philip? Jenny needs to come home with me. She'll be back tomorrow. Philip had no choice but to let me go. In the car with my adoptive mother, she casually asked, back to the academy? Q Academy is where I grew up. It's a semi-charitable, semi-profitable organization. The day I fell into the river, it was the dean of Q Academy who saved me. Her name is Bella. She's a gentle but influential woman, connected to many powerful people. She helped me find all the information I needed. Right now, I am exhausted. I desperately want to go back to my small room at Q Academy and get some sleep. But I know I can't. Revenge is far from over. I don't deserve to rest yet. So I shook my head and said, let's go to the hospital. In the hospital room, Mark lay restlessly on the bed. When he saw me enter, he bounced up immediately. What took you so long? I glanced at the table beside him and shivered silently inside. A string of skinned bird corpses lay there, blood trailing from the table to the floor. This kid is indeed a demon. I forced myself to stay calm and looked at Mark. Your brother didn't want me to see you. Mark grabbed me in anger, smearing blood on my dress. Who does he think he is? He's not worthy of competing with me. Of course not. I said softly, but your mom likes him. Mark kicked over the table in rage. My mom's trash. She says I'm not normal. I'm her child. She calls me a freak. I lowered my eyes, calmly watching him kick and punch. Fiona gave birth to this child, but she didn't love him that much. The reason was simple. My dad didn't know about the Superman syndrome, but Fiona did. She knew how terrifying this child was, but she had no other choice at the time. With her power alone, she couldn't kill my mom and handle the aftermath properly. She had to rely on this male fetus to get my dad on her side. However, every action has consequences. She kept the demon, so she had to bear the accompanying price. Looking at Mark in front of me, I gently consoled him. It's okay. Your mom likes Philip more, but your dad loves only you. Mark's mood brightened a little at that. Of course, I'm my dad's real son. Philip's got nothing to do with my dad. But Philip. He doesn't seem to like Leo, and he doesn't like you either. I persuaded Mark, you, your mom, and dad could have been a perfect family of three. Philip is unnecessary. Mark's eyes lit up with excitement. Yes, without Philip, I'd be my mom's only child. She'd have no choice but to like me. Suppressing my disgust, I tried to ignore the table full of skinned birds and stroked Mark's head. Do whatever you want. I will always support you. Just as I finished speaking, my phone beeped. It was a message from my foster mom. Be careful. Fiona is back. Fiona originally went on vacation with a group of affluent ladies. When she heard her two sons were in trouble, she rushed back immediately. When she got home, Mark had already been discharged. I was tutoring him. During this time, Mark's grades improved, and he became much more obedient. My dad was pleased and even increased my tutoring fee. Philip was very unhappy about me tutoring Mark, but after I explained my predicament and Leo strongly supported it, Philip had no choice. Philip's long pent-up grievances burst out when Fiona returned. He approached her and recounted how Mark stabbed his hand with a pen at the birthday party. I couldn't hold a pen for a long time. I probably won't be able to take the college entrance exam this year. Fiona's face turned red with anger upon hearing this and stormed into the study to confront Mark. Mark, how could you? She stopped mid-sentence when she made eye contact with me. In that moment, I saw sheer terror and resentment in Fiona's eyes. She nearly screamed, "Why are you here?" Fiona's shriek alarmed my dad and Philip downstairs. When they rushed up, they saw Fiona gripping my collar, pinning me against the wall. Philip, startled, hurried over, trying to pull Fiona away. "Mom, what are you doing?" Fiona turned her face. She was pale as a sheet, her pupils dilated, and her throat emitted an unnatural sound. "Can't you see who she is?" My dad frowned. "This is Philip's classmate and Mark's tutor." "What kind of madwoman are you?" Over the years, my dad's relationship with Fiona had deteriorated. Back then, Fiona was as beautiful as a peach blossom, with a captivating figure that made my dad infatuated. But now, 12 years later, Fiona's looks had faded. Moreover, she was a wreck because of two things: Mark being a ticking time bomb with Superman syndrome, and the master Bella found telling Fiona that a female ghostly spirit haunted her. Fiona had become more and more neurotic over the years. At this moment, she pointed at me, her hand trembling. "Leo, this is Jenny, can't you see she's Jenny?" My dad's face changed, and he scolded, "What are you talking about?" "Philip, help your mom downstairs. She needs her medicine." Fiona pushed Philip away and shouted, "Leo, look closely at her. She looks just like Wendy." Her voice was so certain that my dad had to glance at me. I adjusted my expression without hesitation, displaying appropriate panic and confusion. My dad scrutinized me for a long time before sighing softly, "Fiona, your nerves have worsened over the years. You need to take your medication. Jenny just has a common face, there are hundreds who look like her." Fiona shook her head vigorously. "No, Leo, trust my intuition." Fiona angrily turned her head to glare at me, her eyes filled with rage. "I don't care who you are. Get out of here right now. If I see you again, don't blame me for what happens." Philip, being Fiona's son and knowing the details of that old case, began to eye me with suspicion, too. I knew asking for help was useless. Philip wouldn't go against his mom, and my dad wouldn't take sides with a tutor. So, I turned my gaze to Mark. With a soft sigh, I gathered my things and said regretfully, "Mark, it's sad that I can't continue tutoring you. I hope you get an even better tutor in the future." Mark sat silently in his chair, his face so dark it could drip water, casting venomous glares at Fiona that sent chills through the room. He had been born after the case of fraud and murder was settled, so he knew nothing about the specifics. Even if he did, Mark's selfish and twisted nature wouldn't care less. Wendy and Jenny would mean nothing to him. He only knew that Fiona had taken away something he liked. "Mom," Mark said with a sinister tone, "I like Jenny. I want her to stay." Fiona glanced at Mark, feeling disgusted by his twisted look. She turned her head away, not meeting his eyes. "No, there's no discussion on this." Mark silently clenched his fists. "Philip gets whatever he likes, but you take away everything I like," he said in a low voice. Fiona grew more anxious at his words, her skin crawling. I stood there like an outsider, but inside I was laughing coldly. Mark, unfazed by Fiona's repulsion, continued coldly, "You took away the cats I bought, refused to let me perform surgery on them. When I collected dead caterpillars, you screamed and had the maids throw them out. Mom, I tried hard to forgive you, but why do you have to take Jenny away, too?" Just when it seemed like Mark was about to explode, I stepped forward and gently patted his head. "Mark, don't fight with your mom because of May." Slung my bag over my shoulder and said, "I'm leaving, Mark. See me to the door." At the door, I looked around the villa. Dad was arguing softly with Fiona, while Philip was directing the maid to find medicine for Fiona's nerve issues. No one noticed us. I bent down, locking eyes with Mark. In those pupils lay a disturbed soul. I whispered to the devil inside him, "I'm leaving now, Mark. You might never find someone who understands you as well as I do. Take care of yourself. And if you still want to see me again, you know who's keeping us apart, right? If she disappears, we can be together forever." I clearly saw a flicker of fire deep in his eyes. The devil was awakening. Late at night, I lay in my small room at Q Academy. It was cozy, decorated with a citrus aroma diffuser from my foster mom, Bella. It smelled fresh and helped me sleep. But I couldn't sleep at all. Earphones in, I listened closely to the sounds from the other side. When Fiona grabbed me, I secretly placed a small bug on her during her emotional outburst. Now, I could hear her conversation with Dad in their bedroom. Fiona kept repeating, "She is Jenny. 12 years ago, she was 5. Now she's 17. Everything matches." Dad turned over irritably, complaining, "You've been paranoid for years. Last time you even said our female vice president was Wendy's ghost and invited a shaman to the office. You've embarrassed me completely. Please, calm down." Fiona, seeing Dad's indifference, grew more agitated. "Of course you aren't worried. You didn't get your hands dirty. When Wendy was found barely alive, you didn't dare finish her off. I had to use a broken glass shard for the final blow. You thanked me then, and now you call me paranoid?" My blood ran cold. My nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. I barely felt the pain. So Mom had still been alive. They thought she was dead when they checked the car, but she had still had a breath left. She woke up. Fiona had used broken glass to stab my already injured mom one last time. Blood dripped from my hands, soaking into the covers. I bit my lip until my mouth was filled with the coppery taste of blood. A knock on the door snapped me out of it. It was my foster mom, Bella. She saw the blood on my hands and lips but wasn't surprised. Over the years, my intense hatred had tormented me. In painful moments, I would cut my arms. Bella calmly fetched disinfectant and bandages, tending to my wounds. "Jenny, everything is going according to plan. You have the recording of their confession. Just hand it to the police. I'll help you wherever needed. Don't do anything extreme, okay?" I nodded obediently. "Don't worry, Bella, I understand." But once Bella left, I stared at my phone in silence. Bella thought my final plan was to gather evidence and bring the killers to justice. I now had Fiona's confession on tape. But my plan had changed. On that endless rainy night, my mom, bleeding and in pain, had pushed me out of the car into the raging river, unsure if I would survive. She had watched my dad, whom she loved, check if she was dead, and her trusted college friend stab her with glass. What kind of torment did she endure at that moment? And the murderer who killed her would only be locked up in prison. The worst outcome would be getting a needle and then quietly falling asleep. That's not enough. I'm my mom's daughter, and I'm declaring, that's not enough. I got up, went to the window, and looked at the blood-red moon. I picked up my phone and sent an Instagram message to Philip. "Philip, I feel like your mom misunderstands me a lot, but it's okay, I understand. I no longer wish to see you, but I still deeply like you. My only wish is that you stay safe. When I left today, I felt your brother was acting strange. You need to be careful." After sending the Instagram, I turned off my phone and smiled quietly. Crickets chirped outside. Tonight would be a good night. Bella found me while I was having breakfast in the Q Academy cafeteria. She sat across from me, looking at me with a hard-to-describe expression. I calmly finished my pumpkin porridge, then looked up at her. "Something happened at Leo's house?" Yes, something had happened. That night, Mark, like a ghost, entered Fiona's room. Due to her nerves, Fiona had been sleeping in a separate room from my dad, so she was alone in the room. Mark picked up a pillow and covered Fiona's face. He used to love this game, suffocating kittens with a pillow and observing how long it took them to die. Now, his experiment subject was his mother. It was a sort of fateful retribution. Fiona killed my mom while she was pregnant with Mark. So Mark, who participated in the murder from the womb, was born a devil who ignored laws and morals. Mark did not manage to suffocate Fiona. He thought she was no longer moving, so he let go of the pillow. When he went to check if Fiona was still breathing, she suddenly woke up and let out a weak scream. This scream was heard by Philip. Having received my Instagram message, Philip was already on high alert. He suspected Mark might harm Fiona, so he rushed over. Just as he got to the door, he heard Fiona's cries for help. Philip broke down the door to see Mark pressing the pillow back onto Fiona's face. Philip rushed in and yanked Mark away, tussling with him. The noise of the fight startled others in the mansion. My dad and the maids came rushing in. When the lights came on, Fiona was huddled in a corner, terrified, while Philip was pinning Mark to the bed, choking him. "Call the police. Call the police," Philip shouted. Mark tried to kill Mom. He expected my dad to immediately pick up the phone and call the police, but he didn't. My dad was silent for a brief moment, then said to the maids, "You didn't see anything. Breaking the master's secrets is very dangerous," and the maids nodded quickly and left. "Dad?" Philip couldn't believe it. My dad said mournfully, "Philip, let go of your brother." Philip didn't let go. "He's a murderer. He was just playing. He's still a child." My dad's voice got louder. "I'll count to 3. Will you let go?" Philip was silent. At that moment, he might have remembered what I once told him. Leo never truly considered him a son. In Leo's heart, Mark was his real flesh and blood. He realized that Leo would never call the police, that he would always protect Mark. Mark, choking, managed to sneer. "You bastard." He spat in Philip's face. "In a few years, you won't even be worthy of shining my shoes." My dad's voice got even louder. 3. 2. As he counted to 1, Philip moved. All his anger exploded, and he picked up Mark and slammed him into the floor-to-ceiling window. "You read the bastard," he shouted. The glass shattered, and Mark fell headfirst. Fiona let out a scream that didn't sound human. My dad paused for a couple of seconds, then screamed in agony. He turned and ran downstairs. "My son! My son!" Downstairs, someone screamed. A maid or a passing neighbor, it wasn't clear. The sound blended with the summer night cicadas. Minutes later, the sounds of an ambulance and police cars filled the night. Bella finished her story. She sat across from me, watching my face. She was looking for a reaction. But I showed none. Calmly, I cleaned up my tray and stood up. "I'm full. I need to go out." "Jenny," Bella called after me. She stood behind me, her voice sorrowful. "I told you. Hatred is a dark emotion. It will eventually consume you and drag you into hell. Don't get your hands dirty. Don't become a murderer. You had a better future." She really was a good person. She knew Avengers often met bad ends. However, I turned around, smiling calmly and sadly. "Thank you, Bella. But I've been in hell for a long time." I put down my tray, changed into a black dress, and went to Leo's house. I only wanted to see how Philip was doing. I heard he was in trouble. At Leo's house, I cried in front of my dad and Fiona, looking like a girlfriend deeply in love with Philip. My dad's face was so dark it looked like it could drip. Fiona, on the other hand, was hysterical. "Get out. Get out right now," she screamed at me. I cried while silently enjoying their expressions. The hole in my heart, forged by hatred, seemed to get a little smaller. But it wasn't enough, not even close. This was just the appetizer. As I cried, I collapsed to the floor, and a few bodyguards began dragging me out. Quietly, I hid another tiny bug in the crack of the floor. The previous one had been thrown into the washing machine when Fiona changed her clothes. It was useless now. I came to Leo's house today partly to enjoy their suffering and partly to plant a new bug. After leaving, I overheard my dad talking to Fiona. "Let's get a divorce." Fiona was stunned. "Leo, how could you?" My dad got angry. "My son is lying in the ICU, possibly dying. And your son did it. How do you expect us to continue?" Fiona's voice trembled. She opened her mouth several times, trying to say something, but she couldn't form a complete sentence. She knew it was pointless to say anything. My dad had made up his mind. I wasn't surprised at all. I had checked his recent activities. For the past 2 years, he had been close with a young female vice president at his company. She has a hot body and a fiery personality, even more attractive than Fiona used to be. If I could find this out, so could Fiona. 12 years ago, she made a man leave his wife and daughter for her. 12 years later, that same man could leave her too. Not to mention, Fiona became infertile after giving birth to Mark. But my dad, as a man, could still have children with a younger woman eventually. All Fiona said was, "Got it." My dad left. I listened to his footsteps and silently smirked. "Dad, you made a mistake again. You shouldn't underestimate Fiona. She might have become fragile and neurotic, but she's always been tougher than you." Fiona and my dad agreed to get their divorce papers at the Civil Affairs Bureau 3 days later. That day, I arrived early at the bureau and sat hidden across the street, watching. Fiona arrived early too. She stood at the entrance, seeming to wait for something. Her expression was anxious, expectant, and a bit crazy. Clearly, she wasn't waiting for my dad to arrive for the divorce. My dad never showed up. As time passed, Fiona's expression became calmer. She stopped pacing and found a seat, and even started smiling. Finally, Fiona's phone rang. She answered, listened for a few moments, then smiled. I knew Fiona's plan had succeeded. But she wouldn't know that from across the street, in the shadows, I was smiling too. I called Bella. Looks like Leo had an accident on his way here. This was Fiona's plan. She wanted to kill him before the divorce. After hanging up, I looked at the video camera in my hand. It had captured all of Fiona's reactions perfectly. When the police investigate, they'll get this footage. Everyone will see how Fiona reacted to her husband's accident with such a sinister smile. Back at Q Academy, I opened my laptop in my room and kept refreshing the news. Soon, the news broke. My dad had an accident driving from the mountain resort to the city. The female VP, on the passenger seat, was with him. Both were in critical condition, fighting for their lives. I scratched my head, feeling a bit irritated. I didn't want my dad to die so easily. Given all he did to my mom, such a death would be too cheap for him. But my dad didn't die. Even if I sent the footage to the police, Fiona would only be charged with attempted murder. Sure enough, after over 70 hours of surgery, Leo survived, though he was left paralyzed from the neck down. Bella rushed to my room, trying to stop me from doing something crazier. But she found I was already gone. The room was neatly packed, almost empty. Clearly, the owner wouldn't be coming back for a while. Bella felt a chill and frantically tried calling me. When I didn't answer, she started texting over and over. Jenny, don't do something stupid. You're only 17. Reading her messages, I felt touched. During my long ordeal, my foster mother and friends at Q Academy gave me support and comfort. Without Bella, I wouldn't have made it this far. But I had no choice. I was sorry. My name is Jenny. I have only one goal, to clear my mother's name and get justice. Even if it costs everything. Closing my phone, I raised my wine glass and looked at the person across the table. Cheers. The woman across from me raised her glass but didn't clink. Her face had haunted my nightmares countless times. It was Fiona. A day earlier, I sent her an email. It was simple, footage of her actions. Either I send it to the cops, or she pays me $80,000 to keep quiet. We met at this secluded private dining restaurant. In the empty room, only Fiona and I sat across a huge round table, silence hanging in the air. After a moment, Fiona put down her glass, took a thick envelope from her bag, and handed it over the table. Here's your money. $80,000 wasn't much for someone like Fiona. But her hand was shaking. Watching her trembling fingers, I smiled. Fiona, are you really upset about the money? Or does this amount remind you of some old, painful memories? Fiona's face changed. She gritted her teeth. Who are you, really? I took a deep breath, looking at the money. 80,000, a number with significance. Years ago, when Fiona and her son Philip came to my mom for help, they borrowed 80,000 from her. Out of college friendship, my mom generously lent it. That money was never repaid. Now, I was collecting it for her. But this was just the first installment. Rubbing the envelope in my hands, I said calmly, "Auntie, I'm your son Philip's classmate, Jenny." Fiona stared at me, not believing. It didn't matter. I didn't need her to believe anymore. She knew I was Jenny. And I knew she knew. I gave her 24 hours because I knew her nature. Fiona wouldn't sit around and do nothing. "Auntie, I've wanted to ask you something for a long time," I said softly. "Why?" "My mom treated you like a good friend." "Why did you?" Fiona snapped. "Shut up, Jenny. Shut up. You know nothing. Your mom was a saint. From college, she gave me everything. The more she gave, the more I hated her. Why did she pity me? Was I so pathetic? Wasn't she a saint? Then she should give up her whole life to me." I looked up at the window. The summer storm was about to hit, and dark clouds gathered outside. Fiona looked at me, a crazy smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "Jenny, you're still too naive. You actually came to the meeting place I set. This restaurant is mine. All the staff here are on my side. And today there's going to be a heavy storm. The cameras along the mountain road nearby have already been sabotaged ahead of time. Know what I mean? So if someone disappears from here today without a trace, no one will ever know. From this road to the highway, all the way to the border. Wendy will be heartbroken, right? Her favorite youngest daughter, about to be sold off to northern Myanmar." Fiona laughed loudly. "Couldn't help it. You were lucky to escape last time, but you just had to come back yourself." She smashed the wine glass in her hand onto the ground violently. It was a signal to act. Fiona looked at me with a victorious gaze, waiting for her people to barge in. 10 seconds passed. A minute passed. Silence. Fiona's expression changed. I smiled and swirled the wine glass in my hand. "I kept trying to get you to drink, didn't I?" I took a sip of the wine, but I knew you wouldn't dare. Worried I might drug it. "Let me tell you, the drug isn't in the wine. It's been spread as gas through the ventilation ducts. The antidote is actually in the wine." Fiona lunged towards the wine bottle on the table but collapsed after just a few steps. By the broken wine glass she had smashed, liquid flowed. She strained to stick out her tongue to reach it, but couldn't. "It's useless. You and your people can just have a nice sleep now," I said softly. "By the time you wake up, you might already be in northern Myanmar." A truck silently stopped at the back door of the restaurant. Several men got out, all wearing masks and hats. Although the cameras had already been disabled, they were careful not to show their faces. "Where's the goods?" the lead man asked. I had already changed into a server's uniform and obediently stepped forward to guide them. Inside. In the private room, a black sack covered a human figure, which struggled slightly as if resisting. A woman in fine clothing stood beside it. The man looked at her. "You're Fiona?" The woman nodded and pointed at the black sack. "The goods are here." The real Fiona was inside the black sack. I watched alongside the woman as the men loaded the black sack onto the truck. After the truck disappeared completely, the woman took off her dignified coat, revealing a simple dress made of cotton and linen. She removed her wig and makeup, transforming into a young girl. Raindrops began to fall from the sky. The girl came over to me and held an umbrella over my head. "We'll take care of the rest." This girl's name was Shirley. I discovered her contact information in Bella's room. Shirley's family and mine were business rivals. If Fiona and my father completely fell, Shirley's family would undoubtedly benefit. So I decided to give her a call. Unexpectedly, the moment Shirley picked up, she chuckled softly. "Jenny? I've been waiting for your call. You know me? You have Bella to thank for that. She always tried to guide you onto the right path, but also prepared for the possibility of you falling into darkness. She contacted me in advance. If you truly fell into darkness, I'd be here to offer you final protection." Now, looking at Shirley, I said softly, "Thank you." "No, we should thank you. Shirley said. Leo has always been one of the most hated competitors of our Shirley family. Now, thanks to your moves, they've completely crumbled. All their businesses will be taken over by us. But Leo's assets, I suggest you inherit them. You can return to the world as Jenny again. Shirley's family's lawyers will help you. I smiled and shook my head. What I want is just revenge. Shirley hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. I respect your choice. But if you change your mind, please call me anytime. We parted silently in the rain. She went back into the restaurant to handle the remaining matters. The drugged ventilation system would be cleaned thoroughly, and the staff would be silenced in various ways. I took the car Shirley had prepared for me and went down the mountain. I went to my mom's grave. I didn't say much. Mom didn't need to know what I did. She was a kind woman until her death. I didn't want her to know what her daughter had done. So I just told her, I'm doing well. I go to a prestigious high school, get excellent grades, and the teachers say I'm the best. That's probably what Mom would want to hear. After talking with her, I went to the hospital. In the ward, a weak man was confined to the bed. In half a month, he had aged a lot. His eye bags sagged to his mouth, his hair half white. He was my biological father, Leo. After the car accident Fiona set up for him, he was not only paralyzed but also suffered damage to his vocal cords and couldn't speak anymore. I told the nurse I was a classmate of his son, here to visit. The nurse left us alone. It was just me and Leo in the room. I set up my phone in front of him and smiled. Laying on a bed all day must be boring. How about watching something interesting? I played the video. A shrill scream came from the phone. Leo's pupils shrank suddenly. On the video was Fiona. She had been sold to northern Myanmar, her hair disheveled, her face swollen, mouth gagged, and eyes bruised, clearly having been beaten. A knife hovered over her body, moving back and forth before finally finding a spot and stabbing in. Fiona's screams were hair-raising. My dad lay on the bed, the fat on his face shaking violently. And my expression remained calm. Good. When my mom was attacked with all those glass shards, Fiona should feel some of that pain too. Isn't that right, Dad? I looked at the man on the bed. He stared at me with wide eyes, mouth open, unable to make a sound. Why look at me with such fear? I'm Jenny, Dad. I chuckled and put away my phone. Fiona will be tortured to death. She's the one who made you like this. I helped you get revenge. Oh, by the way, Mark, your youngest son, he stayed in ICU for a month and a half but didn't make it. I heard his classmates' parents celebrated his death. My dad's eyes were practically bulging out of their sockets, and a deep growl of sorrow rose from his throat. See, you can't always rely on your son. I picked up an apple from the fruit basket I brought and started peeling it slowly with a knife. Fiona knew he was a superhuman since the pregnancy test, but she didn't dare tell you. On one hand, she needed your support back then, so she couldn't afford to let go of this precious boy. On the other hand, I held the apple, tilted my head with a bigger smile. What if Mark wasn't actually your son? My dad froze completely. Raising someone else's kid for years, and even thinking of him as a brave and precious sweetheart, that's the kind of ending you deserve for wanting a son so badly. Of course, the one responsible for the death of your precious Mark won't get away either. Philip has been charged with premeditated murder now, did you know? My plan to get close to him had been brewing long ago. I waited until he turned 18. I didn't want him to get any leniency for being a minor. The apple was peeled. I took a big bite, swallowed the crisp, sweet juice, and looked at Leo. He had stopped moving. Cold sweat was pouring down from his head, and he reeked. He had lost control. Yes, Dad. Everyone who hurt my mom will pay the price. None of you can escape, got that? Not a single one of you. But don't worry. I'll treat you a bit better. After all, my mom loved you a lot. I smiled, patting the edge of his bed, so I'll keep you alive. I won't let you die so easily. You can lie here, day by day, repenting for what you did to my mom." I leaned close to Leo and whispered in a low voice, then stepped back and sweetly said, "Uncle, see you next time." Finishing, I turned and left, leaving Leo behind in despair, screaming. Inside the largest activity room of Q Academy, the kids were all watching TV together. One of them suddenly shouted, "Jenny's back." The kids swarmed around. "Jenny, tell us a story." Jenny sat down good-naturedly, and took a fairy tale book. Today's story is about Mommy Fox picking grapes. There was a fox den in the mountains, and Little Fox was crying out of hunger. Mommy Fox quickly said, "Don't cry, baby, Mommy will go pick some yummy grapes for you." Little Fox waited and waited, but Mommy never came back. Suddenly, Little Fox heard Mommy shouting, "Run, run." Little Fox realized hunters had come, and started running desperately. Jenny didn't finish the story. She was too tired, fell asleep leaning on the sofa, and tears slid down her cheeks, soaking the page. The oldest kid quietly covered her with a blanket. He knew this was Jenny's favorite story. Every time she told this story to new kids, she would cry. The ending of this story was that Mommy Fox never came back. But one day, Little Fox returned home and found a whole grapevine. Mommy Fox had left the vine there before being caught by hunters, and it had rooted and grown into a whole grapevine. Little Fox finally got to eat those grapes after years of waiting. The grapes were very, very sweet. Little Fox shouted to the valley, "Mommy, thank you." Even though Mommy could no longer hear. Jenny had a dream. She dreamt of the rainy night 12 years ago. For 12 years, she had this recurring dream, where her mom left, and she couldn't do anything. But this time, everything changed. They finally drove out of that rainy night. The car drove smoothly, no accidents, no murders, the mountain wind blowing with the sweet scent of flowers. Jenny woke up and found herself covered with a blanket, the fairy tale book half opened next to her. The new kids gathered around her. What happened next in the story? Originally, Jenny had written an ending where Little Fox avenged her mom. But now, she smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. The ending is, she softly said, Mommy Fox brought back the grapes, and both she and Little Fox ate until they were full. When Jenny left Q Academy, the storm had stopped. She saw two figures in the distance, a girl in a long linen dress, and a man in a suit. Jenny recognized them. The girl was Shirley, and the man, whom Shirley had mentioned before, seemed to be her brother. Shirley approached Jenny. "You can't come to Q Academy anymore. Your foster mom Bella has taken in many kids. If the police finally catch on to you, you will implicate them all." Jenny was silent. She knew Shirley was right. After 12 years, she had avenged but was homeless again. "So, join us." Shirley extended her hand to Jenny. "Believe me, with your intelligence, calmness, ruthlessness, and determination, you'll soon be one of our best." "Who are you?" "We are the scavengers, quietly cleaning up all the rot in the dark." Shirley smiled. "As for more, you'll learn with time." Jenny looked at Shirley's hand finally. She reached out and took it. "All right, I'll join." The sun was setting. They walked into the deep night side by side. "But it's okay. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again."